Long ago, when humans still roamed the earth as hunters and gatherers, life was a constant journey of discovery. Every sunrise meant new hopes for food, and every sunset meant another day survived. People followed herds of animals across plains, climbed mountains in search of berries, and learned to read the whispers of the wind and the soil beneath their feet. But deep inside, something was changing. A quiet question began to bloom. What if we didn't have to keep moving? At first, no one dared to imagine a world where food stayed in one place. For thousands of years, nature was unpredictable, sometimes generous, sometimes harsh. But then came a small, brilliant spark of observation. Someone noticed that seeds dropped on the ground began to grow again after the rain. Maybe it was an elder, maybe a curious child, but that moment changed everything. People began to experiment, dropping seeds near their camps to see what would happen. They watched green shoots push through the earth and realized they could grow food on purpose. This discovery was so simple yet so powerful it gave humans control over their survival for the first time. The world was about to experience its first true revolution, the farming revolution. As the seasons turned, people learned the rhythm of the land. They studied which plants liked sunlight and which preferred shade. They learned to store seeds from the best harvests and plant them again the next year. Each season became a lesson, written not on paper but in the patterns of nature itself. Slowly, the wild became a garden where hunters once chased deer, farmers now tended wheat and barley. The landscape began to change. Open fields replaced wild forests, and fences marked boundaries that had never existed before. The earth that once only gave what it wished now responded to human hands and patience. But farming wasn't easy. Early farmers had to face storms, droughts, and hungry animals. They built fences from branches and stones to protect their crops. They used sharp sticks to dig the soil, their first version of the plow. And when tools broke, they learned to make stronger ones from stone and bone. With food growing nearby, people didn't need to wander anymore. They built huts from wood, clay, and straw. Families began to stay together through seasons and years. Children grew up watching their parents work the fields instead of walking endless miles. And for the first time, people started calling one place home. Home meant safety, but also responsibility. When plants needed water, people built channels and ditches to guide the rivers. When pests attacked, they found clever ways to chase them off. The community began to share work. Some planted, others gathered, and a few became toolmakers or builders. This was the beginning of teamwork and specialization. Villages grew beside rivers where the soil was rich and water flowed freely. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Indus, these rivers became lifelines of the first farming societies. People sang as they worked, told stories to teach their children when to plant and harvest, and celebrated when crops grew tall and golden. The rhythm of human life was no longer the chase, but the cycle, the rise and fall of the seasons. Food became more than survival, it became culture. Bread baked from grain, porridge from barley, and stews from lentils filled the air with comforting smells. People began to trade extra food for tools, shells, or colorful stones. This simple exchange would later grow into trade and money, but for now, it was about friendship and trust. Animals, too, became part of this new life. Instead of hunting them, people began to tame them. Dogs guarded fields, goats gave milk, and sheep offered warm wool. Each animal found its place beside humans, forming a bond that would last forever. And with farming came time. For the first time in history, people didn't have to spend every day searching for food. They could rest, think, and dream. They painted, carved, made pottery, and invented new ways to store grain. Leisure gave birth to imagination, and imagination gave birth to civilization. Of course, farming brought challenges too. When harvests failed, whole villages could starve. When rivers flooded, homes could vanish overnight. But these hardships taught resilience and planning skills that would define the future of humankind. The farming life changed the human spirit as much as it changed the land. Instead of chasing after nature, humans began working with it. They observed the stars to track seasons, honored the earth with rituals, and learned that patience could feed more people than speed ever could. The land and the people became one as the sun rose each morning, fields shimmered with promise. Children ran between rows of grain, laughing as the wind danced around them. Elders sat beneath shade trees, telling stories about the days before farming when life was wild and uncertain. And as they spoke, everyone knew those stories were precious reminders of how far humanity had come. The farming revolution wasn't just about food, it was about transformation. It turned wanderers into settlers, hunters into builders, and survival into stability. It gave birth to families, villages, traditions, and hope. And though no one at the time realized it, this quiet revolution was the foundation of every city, kingdom, and nation that would ever exist. So, when the first farmers looked across their fields of golden grain, they weren't just seeing plants. They were seeing a future of humankind growing from the soil beneath their feet. And as the wind rustled through the crops, it whispered a new truth: humanity had learned not just to live from the earth, but to live with it. As villages grew and fields spread across the valleys, humanity began to weave itself into the landscape like threads in a giant tapestry. Every sunrise was no longer a call to wander, but a signal to care, to water, to weed, to harvest, and to dream. The fields were alive with buzzing bees, singing birds, and the laughter of children chasing one another through tall grass. For the first time, humans had built something that would last beyond their lifetimes. Grain silos rose beside the huts, simple towers of clay and straw built to store the precious harvest. Inside them, seeds slept safely through the winter, waiting for the next spring's call. This was more than just cleverness, it was foresight, the spark of planning that made humans masters of time itself. People began thinking not only about today's meal, but about next season, next year, and even the next generation. The rhythm of farming shaped new traditions. Each planting season became a celebration, each harvest a festival. People danced under the stars, thanking the earth for her gifts. Drums echoed through the night as fires flickered, and children learned songs that spoke of rain, soil, and life. Those early songs were not just music, they were memories, keeping knowledge alive long before books existed. As villages became towns, people began to notice that some lands grew better crops than others. They studied the soil and learned that not all dirt was the same. Some soils loved wheat, others preferred beans or vegetables. Farmers began experimenting with crop rotation, changing what they planted each year to keep the soil strong and healthy. They were learning science without knowing the word for it. But new knowledge also brought new problems. If one village grew more food than another, neighbors might grow jealous. Trade could turn into competition, and competition could turn into conflict. To protect themselves, people built walls and fences, marking the first borders in human history. And so, farming gave rise not only to peace and abundance, but also to ownership and defense. Yet, despite disagreements, farming connected people more than it divided them. When one village had too much grain and another too little, trade brought them together. Clay pots, woven baskets, and stone tools traveled from hand to hand, spreading ideas along with goods. Every exchange carried not just objects, but knowledge, the silent teacher of humankind. Soon, people realized they could use animals to help them farm. Strong oxen pulled heavy plows, saving humans countless hours of backbreaking labor. Donkeys carried water, sheep grazed in meadows, and chickens scratched near homes, keeping pests away. Every creature became part of the human family, working together in harmony. The bond between humans and animals deepened, one hoofprint and pawprint at a time. With food in abundance, some people no longer needed to farm every day. A few became tool makers, crafting sharper blades and sturdier plows. Others became potters, shaping clay into jars that told stories through painted symbols. Some watched the sky, tracking stars and seasons to guide farmers when to sow and reap. Thus, the first scientists and artists were born from the soil, from curiosity, from peace. Over time, settlements grew larger and more complex. Huts turned into houses, and houses gathered around open courtyards where families met to share meals and news. Children learned to count grains and measure fields, unknowingly practicing the first forms of mathematics. People began carving marks on clay tablets to record harvests. The birth of writing was just around the corner. The farming revolution was quietly planting the seeds of civilization itself. But not every day was easy. Sometimes crops failed when the rain refused to fall. Sometimes rivers flooded and washed away entire fields. When disaster struck, people prayed to the sky, to the sun, to the rivers, asking for mercy. Out of gratitude and fear, the first rituals were born, tiny acts of hope in the face of nature's power. Farming taught humans patience like no lesson before it. Seeds didn't grow faster if you shouted at them, and rain wouldn't come because you wished it. People learned to wait, to nurture, to trust the rhythm of the earth. That patience shaped the human spirit. It made us gentler, wiser, and more connected to the land. New inventions made life easier too. People learned to make irrigation canals to bring water to dry places. They built granaries on raised platforms to protect food from floods. They created grinding stones to turn grains into soft, warm bread. And each improvement made life just a little bit more comfortable, a little more human. Over time, entire families worked together like parts of one great machine. The grandparents told stories, the parents farmed, and the children chased chickens between rows of wheat. Evenings were filled with laughter, the smell of cooking fires, and songs that rose toward the stars. The land didn't just feed them, it became part of their identity. They were no longer wanderers, they were farmers, the caretakers of the earth. As decades turned into centuries, farming spread across continents. From the valleys of Mesopotamia to the plains of China, from the Nile Delta to the hills of Central America, people discovered the same truth, that life grows where love and labor meet. And though they spoke different languages, their dreams were the same: food, family, and peace. Villages turned into towns, towns into cities, and cities into civilizations. Walls rose, temples appeared, markets buzzed with voices, and the first rulers began to emerge. All of it, every brick, every idea, every tradition sprang from the humble seed planted long ago by a curious human hand. That single act of planting changed the destiny of our species forever. By the time the first cities glimmered under the sun, the world was unrecognizable. No longer wild and empty, it pulsed with human rhythm, fields waving like golden seas, rivers bending around villages, and smoke curling gently from hearths. Humanity had taken the wild chaos of nature and turned it into harmony, into home. So the next time you see a seed sprouting from the soil, remember it's more than a plant. It's a symbol of the greatest revolution our ancestors ever achieved. A promise between Earth and humankind that still lives within us today. Because once humans learn to plant a seed, we also learn to plant hope, and that hope has never stopped growing.